What is up, Buff Nation? RK here with my guy, Ted Chalfen, the author of Folsom's Greatest Games, the fantastic series that he has been running on the DNVR.com recently. And I've been thinking, Ted, I have a new nickname for you.
Oh, boy.
I like the young historian.
Was that with an OU or just YU? Like,
Ooh, then you just remove the, and then it's just young
historian?
historian.
Yeah.
That kind of goes hard, I'm not going to lie.
Well, thank you. I'll take that nickname.
All right. We need, it's kind of a weird thing you don't think about, but like when you think of a historian, you think of an older person just naturally, but like someone else has to take the torch eventually as the next historian. So I feel like you're in pole position to be the future historian of the University of Colorado football.
I've kind of dreamed of being that in some form down the line. I don't know if that's a position that they would want to pay. I think ideally I somehow make a lot of money and then I just get that as like a honorary title and get to kind of hang around in the archives and do what I would do anyway. Because I went there this summer. Curtis Snyder let me into their archives in July for a couple of hours, and I could just look at anything I wanted to. And it was an amazing experience for me. I found so many old newspapers and actual copies of game quotes, some handwritten stuff, Denver Post drafts of stories that had just been left in the press box and that they then would just put in these folders, and the folders go in a drawer, and then they sit there until somebody wants to come look at them. I found photo negatives that I got to scan and flip to positive, which may have never been seen by anybody before. It was really great experience for me, and it helped me really get in touch with this project. It made it feel much more tactile, much more real, and it's not just reading text on a computer screen when you actually get to interact with the history like that.
That's really
awesome. Being a historian. What can I say?
I know you. I knew you did that, but I haven't really heard a lot about that from you. Like when you walk into that like room or area of that room or whatever it may be, like where did you start? Like how do you
it's even? It's pretty well organized. Luckily, it's organized by year. So I started at the beginning, and unfortunately, I didn't get all the way up to the present. And I felt like my strategy was to start at the beginning, because with the more recent games, at least we have more online resources. We have more video. People remember them better. I was really trying to do my best to get as much information on the earlier games as I could, because those are the ones that people don't know about, that I didn't know as much about, that in learning about, some of them went way higher on the list than I thought they would because of outside factors that you don't see when you just look at the Wikipedia table of like, this is who they played and what the score was. So I didn't, if you'll notice, if you look at the articles, a lot of the older ones have the most newspaper clippings and the more recent ones don't. I would like to go back someday and see what they've got for the 2000s to see just in that context, because I didn't get the Denver Post or the Rocky Mountain News, and I only got the camera, and just to see all that stuff would be cool.
That sounds awesome, man. You've kind of inspired me. I might have to hit up Curtis, or Kurt Dog, as Neely calls him.
They'll let you. They'll let you do it. I mean, it's probably pretty busy in there right now, but off season, I'm sure they'll let you do it.
Well, I used to go. Now I'm showing my nerd side. I used to go to the library at CU and open up the old yearbooks.
I did that too. That was my second day. I did 2 days of research. I did that too. Go on.
No, and I just, it was so fascinating to just like see like little parcels of the past and like, like projects that students were working on back then. And you would see little pieces about football. And I can't even remember exactly what project I was working on when I did that, but I made a whole story about it in like the early DNVR or the early BSN days, of just some of the cool stuff that I discovered there. So I definitely get that. It actually reminds me, not to go on a tangent here, but like we found some relics at the DNVR bar from like old things that used to inhibit that space. And like that stuff is just so cool. Like that fires me up every time. Like it was like this cool, like ritzy jazz lounge at one point, and you just like imagine like the things that were happening and the conversations that were going on in that building. So I'm in on this. I'm in on the historian side of things.
Yeah, no, because I know one of the first things we ever talked about on Twitter was you had found a full copy of 6236 on YouTube, and we're going to do a live tweet of it. And I, at that point, had never seen the whole game. It was just lived in a highlight video. We're pretty spoiled now with how many full games we have on YouTube. Just 10 years ago, they were mostly just clips. That was all you could find. And so I always knew you were interested in the past. And yearbooks, how far back did you go? Because I pulled 1925 and 1935. Those were the oldest ones that I asked them to pull for me. And that was a trip to see 100 years ago and 90 years ago what CU was like.
I don't remember. I just found them on the shelves. So
okay.
I don't even remember. Like, I have to go back and find the post that I actually made about it. Because I remember I discovered a thing in there about that I hadn't known before, which was like, you know, CU was wearing the silver and black before the Raiders.
That's right.
And Al Davis was like, dang, like that looks sick. We should make our uniform something like that. So
is that last part true? Did you actually hear that he got it from Colorado?
It was in there like anecdotally, same way you've always heard it, but like the rumor was something along those lines.
Well, they did it in 1959, and it was a major change. They had always worn all gold, which was really all yellow at home, and people complained about it and thought it looked bad. And so when Sonny Grandelius got hired, the first thing he did was completely change the uniforms to silver and black. And then when he got fired because of a recruiting scandal, things are cyclical, RK. Things are really cyclical the more you learn about history. When he got fired because of a recruiting scandal in 1962, CU didn't wear silver again for a very, very long time until the Mike McIntyre era. But those were sick uniforms. I also looked at microfilm. I had to learn how to use a microfilm reader to go back and look at the Daily Camera and the Denver Post from 1924, 1934. And that was an experience.
What does that even mean?
It's a newspaper will get printed on these reels of film where it looks like movie film almost, in that each frame is like a page, but then you put it under this thing that's kind of like a magnified overhead projector, and you have these levers and stuff, and you pull it and it like will just like go through. And the one I was using was actually digitized, and I could get copies in PDF, which was pretty cool. In the old days, you used to have to just like print it. But yeah, that I would love to go back and do more of that, honestly. Like I could do that all day. I could talk about it all day, but we should probably get into the meat of the matter here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from your perspective, what was your favorite thing that you learned while planning and writing this series?
My first favorite thing was actually the inside cover of the 1935 yearbook, which is this amazingly sick buffalo pattern, because that was the year that they became the Buffaloes and developed an identity. And it was so cool to see the yearbook from that year that it was Buffalo themed on the inside. And I just think it's such a cool modern looking design that Home Field should turn into a t-shirt or a sweatshirt that I would 100% wear. I will tweet it out again. I tweeted it out a couple weeks ago, but I will tweet it out again after this goes up because it looks just so cool. Well, it's in the bottom corner of all the graphics. We incorporated it into the graphics. It's in the bottom corner. So that was just an awesome find. I think also just learning about how big a deal CU football was in different eras. In the 1950s, Folsom Field was larger than Memorial Stadium in Nebraska for a period of a couple of years. And
wow.
Yeah, before Nebraska expanded it when Bob Devaney got there and they started winning a lot. And in 1924, the enrollment was 2,000 people, and they had 14 or 15,000 people in there for games against CSU, who was Colorado A&M at the time, and Utah. And the Denver Post for the opening ceremonies on November 1st, 1924, 100 years ago, flew a plane over and took an aerial photograph that they then flew back to Denver so they could get it developed in time to run it with the game story. Like, just seeing that this was not your Michigan, your Ohio State, your Notre Dame, or what have you, but that regionally it was an enormous deal, finding out that the largest crowd for any sporting event in Colorado was a game at Folsom Field all the way until 1975, when the Broncos expanded Mile High. Like, in 1972, the Broncos were an NFL team, and the largest crowd in Colorado sports history was the crowd for the CU Oklahoma game that year in Colorado sports history. So to see that in the days long before anybody's real recollection at this point, before television, when things kind of can recede into the background a little bit, one of the things that was so cool about this was just to really dig in and try to live vicariously through those people's past experiences, through those primary sources, and realize that the thrill people felt when they beat Utah for the first time in 9 years on homecoming in 1934, when they played as the Buffaloes for the very first time, is probably just as profound as the thrill people felt when they beat Nebraska in 2001 or 1986 or 2019. It was not just people having sandwiches and lounging around and having a good time. Like, people really cared a lot about CU football in the very distant past. And I feel like we're so sort of Bill McCartney and forward centric when we think about the glory days. We're thinking about the 80s and the 90s, and plenty of it, all the old stuff, for me, was just super cool.
I have so many thoughts on what you said, but I think first and foremost, I don't think this was intended on your part, but this is such an important time to uncover little things like that, and for that sentiment, because as longtime Buffs fans, it's almost like an attack on us directly when people say, like, oh, Colorado had no fans before Coach Prime got there, and like, we're constantly like fighting for our lives online, being like, no, you don't understand. Like,
you're a braver warrior than I am. I don't fight those battles, but I see you fighting them.
Well, and it's just because I love this era, and it's, arguably my favorite era of Colorado football, especially because I was so young the last time it was this exciting. But like, I was in the building for 62-36. So I remember that holiday season, like, all anyone could talk about was Colorado football. Anywhere you went, like in my elementary school choir class, we learned the fight song. Like, it was, so when people act like, we were just irrelevant forever and just popped up in the last couple of years, it's like, this is like a perfect time for you to kind of talk about the fact that it's not just the early 2000s. It's not just the early 90s. It goes back and back and back. And like, there's all, this is almost the continuation of a pattern rather than an anomaly.
Yeah, I think the anomaly is 2006 through 2022, with the exception of the 2016 the Rise season. I think that's more a deviation from the norm than the norm. If you look at the history of this program, there's a lot more winning than losing if you go back the last 100 to 115 years. And a really cool thing happened today. Sean Tufts messaged me on Twitter and said that he'd been enjoying the series, and said that when he was around, that the old timers were always talking about how the early 70s were just as exciting, or in the old timers' opinions, more exciting than the era that Sean was playing in. But I think a lot of those voices are not really on the internet. And I think it's just really important that we make the effort to learn about things that have happened, people who've gone before us. And I'm going to transition into talking a little bit about Fred Casati, who wrote several books on Colorado football. He was, before Dave Platty, the sports information director at CU Boulder. This is Football CU Style, which came out in 1972. And his top 25 list in this, which I got about 6 years ago, is the main impetus for me thinking that someday it would be really cool to do a list like that. For him, it was just from his first 25 years working for the Buffs from 1947 to 1971. But that told me so much about what it used to be like, and in a kind of detail that I had never seen before. So if you're interested in this stuff, there's that book. There is The Golden Buffaloes, which is a total history up to 1980. You can find these on eBay. They're not expensive. And then he wrote, after the miracle 1989 season, but before the national championship, he wrote CU Century, which was about the first 100 years of Colorado football. And it's more of like a large format coffee table book with with bigger pictures and Byron White, things of that nature. So Casati was like the godfather of CU history. We have stats going back to 1946 in detail only because of him. Before that, it's very sketchy. But as soon as he got there, he started keeping records. And I think the guy that really picked the baton up from him is Stuart Whitehair, who runs CU at the Game, who has covered every single game in long form detail since 1980. So if you're interested in reading about anything that's happened since 1980 on my list, I link his recap at the bottom of every game because he goes into more detail than me. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of, I don't want to compare myself to those two because they've been at it a lot longer than I've been alive. Casati, unfortunately, no longer with us, but he did it for a long time. But those are like the forebears of like great CU scholarship. And I just wanted to mention them.
Well, and Dave Platty as well, who kind of directly took the baton from Casati, has, you can tell there's a lot of influence in the way that he, keeps history and shares things. He'll reference Casati quite a bit just when he talks, and the press box is dedicated to the Casati. And so it's a cool thing to kind of go through this history. The other thing that I wanted to mention is because you hit on something that I think most people don't think about, but I think about every time I walk into Folsom. And you said like the joy and elation that people felt when they beat Utah, and I think you said 1938,
34, but yeah,
34. Sorry,
a long time ago.
It is similar to 2001 or 2016 when they beat Utah to clinch the chance to play for the Pac-12 title. When there's certain places in sports for me where you walk into it and you can like feel something. You feel something. You feel like magic, and I totally feel that in Folsom. And I think about that exact thing. Especially like in this year where it's 100 years, every time I walk in there, I'm like, oh man, like 80 years ago, 90 years ago, 100 years ago, people were doing the exact same thing as me. Like, and there's been so much magic that has occurred on this field between these walls that like, you can feel it. And like the Baylor game is like such a perfect example of a moment that's just like, there's been so many of those, but each one of them is special. And like, there's this long thread that connects us to people that were doing that 100 years ago at this point and celebrating, and each game like connects it and it's passed on as a memory. And so, not to go.
Yes, no, exactly. And a lot of those memories now are not living memories. There's nobody who was at that 1934 game, as far as I know. I guess Peggy was 10 or 9. So you'd have to ask what her earliest memories are of CU football, but there's certainly nobody that was at the first game 100 years ago. And that's why, I think keeping it alive is important. Like, imagine I just had this wild thought while you were going on about that. Imagine you're like a rock on Flagstaff Mountain, and like, you've just been sitting there for like millions and millions of years, but every year for the last 100 years, or even actually before that when they were playing games elsewhere, but let's say for the last 100 years, between 5 and 7 times a year, there's just this like sound that like hits you with regularity, 5 or 6 times a year. And like, it's because people have been going to that spot and they've been cheering for the Buffaloes for that long. And, I get emotional when I think about it because 100 years it's a long time.
Amen. I don't know where you want to go next. I will say my favorite part so far of the series is actually something that is counter to my belief. I don't know if it's popular belief, but it is, you actually texted me when I talked about how if Travis Hunter played in the era of Whizzer White, like they would have thought that he was like, they would have like changed the rules and said like,
Mm-hmm.
this guy, it's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of always just believed that, and it might still be true. But you in number 5 posted the highlight of Cliff Branch,
Yeah.
and that's in 1970
Yeah.
against Penn State. What was it? Penn State had won 30 or 20 something games.
Yeah. They had a really long unbeaten streak going back a couple of years. 23 undefeated, no, 23 wins and 31 wins and ties without a loss.
And that highlight of Cliff Branch like returning a kick for a touchdown, I was like, oh, he looks like he could play like right now.
Yeah, and not a big guy either, though. Like that, like not. But there's guys now that are not big guys that can do that. And Cliff, NFL Hall of Famer. Unfortunately, they didn't do that early enough for him to receive the honor in person, which was a travesty. But yeah, that is one of my favorite things I uncovered, because that clip was cut out of the game film, as unfortunately a lot of the biggest highlights were, probably for a year-end banquet or something where they showed the best plays from the year. So when I was go back through these all 22 coaches films that Snelson had digitized and put on the CU YouTube channel, bless him, a lot of the best plays, including that one, were not in there. But then just within the last year, the Penn State documentary about that Penn State season got posted, and thank God they had a great angle of that in living color, and you can see just how sensationally fast Cliff Branch was.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought you were going to mention is that Whizzer White and Travis Hunter are the same height and the same weight. Yes. So like, I'm sure Travis can do things that Byron White couldn't do, but I'm sure if you saw him out on a football field today, Whizzer White, that is, that I think he could probably do a few things. Like, I think he could be like a slot receiver. I don't think he could probably cover, but I think the guy was certainly a tremendous athlete. He was a great basketball player too. I think fewer and farther between did you have the truly amazing athletes back then, but I think they were out there.
Absolutely. I mean, Whizzer White, just his entire story is mind-boggling, but it's cool for him to come up right now because, talking about, all of the new fans that have been, infused into Colorado football, and you've got Preston Hodge out there wearing 24 right now. And I think some people would maybe take issue with that. But he also is wearing on his jersey a special patch that honors Whizzer White. Mm-hmm. And because of that, a lot of new fans have been like, what's that patch? What's going on there? And have thus learned about the greatness of Whizzer White. And so, like, I think it's actually really cool that he's wearing that number. And it's kind of brought up the story of Byron Whizzer White and just, his several pages of what made him great.
And one of the frustrating things was I couldn't find a way to get a game that he played in on the list. He was playing freshman football that year. Freshmen were not eligible the year in 1934 when they beat Utah. I'm sure he could have contributed greatly to that team, but freshmen were ineligible. But I think of all the things that people kind of know about long ago CU football, he's one that I think people kind of like. If anybody knows anything, they know him. Is K.O. Lamb a name you're familiar with?
Yes.
Yeah, K.O. Lamb played in that Utah game, and he led the nation in rushing the next year in 1935. Not only was he a singer and a band leader in his free time, he was also a boxer, and that's where the name K.O. comes from.
That is sick.
Yeah. They alphabetized it as K-A-Y-O, but that's his name. And he was like 5'7", but he was a fascinating guy who would be completely eclipsed by Whizzer White's accomplishments. But yeah, there's just so much you can learn the farther down the rabbit hole that you go. We're down to, I guess at this broadcast, this recording, we're down to 2. I don't know when this is going to air. And it's the same 2 I told you were going to be the finalists almost a year ago or over a year ago when we did this. It's 1989 Nebraska and 2001 Nebraska. And I labored long and hard over the decision, but I realized that I really had to make the right call. And I think that 99% of people will agree that I made the right call. when that goes up. And I think you will as well.
Yeah, I think I will as well.
I want to make a documentary on one season of those two, but I want to make a documentary just on one game. And it's the one that I want to make a documentary about the game that should be number one, if that makes sense.
I love it. I love it.
What's your top 5? Did you make a top 5?
Yeah, so you asked me to make my top 5 of games I have attended. For those of you who don't know, I have attended, gosh, I should have actually tabulated it. I've been wanting to recalibrate how many I've been to, but
probably like 140.
I was just going to say it's right around there. In 2016, wait, no, I don't remember. I think we hit 100 in 2015 or 2016. So
yeah, that tracks.
So we're up around, maybe we're around or past 150 at this point.
Yeah,
I got to check it out. Either way, I've missed 2 in that period since 2001. The streak started actually with 62-36 that season. It was actually the second home game of that season that it started. And neither of the 2 games I missed would have made this list. It was
USC in 2021, right? That was the first one?
Yep. And then
what was the second one?
Arizona State 2022.
Okay.
That was the one that actually their second closest game of that season.
Yeah, they played that they lost by only 8 points. And it was so sad. I mean, I just remember Ryan Green walking around at the tailgate before TCU, and the only topic was, so why are you still coming to Buff games? That was the package that he was doing, was why are you still here?
That never came out. That's gonna be hidden footage that the next Ted uncovers one day. He's gonna be in 2022 they were down so bad.
Yeah, I love that they're still using a picture from that tailgate, I believe, for the promo for the DNVR tailgate. Yep. It's come a long way since then, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm in it.
All right. So I tabulated my top 5. And what's weird is they're actually in chronological order. And it's interesting in that way. But it starts.
You want to start at 5?
Yeah, we're going to start at 5. And it's from this year. I put the Baylor game from this year as my number 5 favorite game I've ever seen at Folsom. As a football fan, you just don't get to see a walk-off not a walk-off, but a Hail Mary to send you to overtime with a walk-off fumble on the goal line ever. That's a once-in-a-lifetime type of game. The stakes only keep getting better and higher. And, unfortunately, if it weren't for that Kansas State loss, it would be probably even growing faster and larger in its influence. But we're talking about a very, very different outlook for this season if that, Folsom magic doesn't happen that night. So
100%. Not only that, but as I said when I put it in there, I said this is already higher than 24, but I can't reorder I'm not going to reorder the list right now. I'm going to put it in there and say it deserves to be on the list, and then we'll reassess after the season. That fumble was forced by the guy that's currently leading the odds to win the Heisman Trophy. And if he does, that would be one of the signature moments from that season. And the Hail Mary thrown by a guy who is probably going to go on to be a pretty darn good NFL quarterback.
Yep.
And so that's a game that, as time goes by, could be looked at more and more and more fondly, depending on the way those guys perform in the NFL and potentially what postseason awards they may garner. But that was really big time. So,
yeah. And I mean, Shedeur Sanders, in my opinion, is going to leave school as the best quarterback in school history. Travis Hunter is potentially or probably going to leave school as the best overall player in school history. They both have special moments in that game. And the last thing I'll mention about it is I literally live, and I'm using literally in the correct form here. I literally live for a crowd pop.
Me too.
the sound of 50,000+ people all losing their minds at the same time is like the greatest sound ever to me. And so that specific one was otherworldly and probably the best one I can remember because of the shock, like some other moments that I'll get to on this list have like incredible crowd pops from the things that happened, but that one, no one was expecting it. So it's like dead silent before the play. And
it's like the Askia Booker shot. It's like the Askia Booker shot. The vibes were so bad before that went in. It was like, oh my God, we're going to overtime. We're going to blow it to Kansas again. And then like,
yep.
Oh my God. It's like Allie's. Is that Allie's brother who says, oh shoot, we lost?
He goes, it's over. We lost.
Yeah. It's such an amazing video. That's such an amazing little brother to your, oh my God, video of the Askia Booker shot.
It truly is.
If you don't know, look it up.
Exactly.
One more thing about the crowd pop thing. Yeah. Have I ever told you that the book I want to write the most, other than kind of the book length project I've been doing about Folsom these last 2 years, is going around and interviewing sports people about the loudest moment they've ever experienced and ask them to describe it? I think that would be a fascinating book.
That really would. And then like almost trying to uncover like the loudest any stadium's ever been.
I mean, scientifically, that would be difficult. But one thing I heard, I was reading this book. It's not a great book, but it's an interesting book about Game 163 that the Rockies played in 2007. And one of the relief pitchers said that after they got like the final out of one inning, that he actually felt his hair move because of the yell from the stands, and that he has never before or since experienced that. So that's got to count for something.
That is crazy.
That's probably the craziest environment that I've ever been in personally. But anyway, number 4.
On to number 4. And this one was hard because I wanted to make sure that I got something from this season in there. But there's a couple different options. I think some people might go one way or the other way, but I ended up, because of the stakes, going with the Utah game from 2016. Honestly, at this point, I don't know about you, the whole thing kind of feels like a fever dream.
It felt like a fever dream then.
Yes, it did. But like now I look back on it and I'm like, it almost just doesn't even seem real when I look back on it. But like the confidence in the team was so prevalent going into that game. And like it almost actually knocked it down a peg for me, because I was like, everyone expected to win.
They did.
But that also then was like, man, what a special time. Like, it's funny how it worked out, but I had just stopped covering the team on a full-time basis. So it was my first year in a while that I got to experience every game from the stands, and just one after another that year was just like, man, this team is special. And that's what, my like overarching memory of that is just like, oh, like this is kind of like a once in a lifetime thing as a college football fan, where just like a bunch of guys who weren't very good stuck together I shouldn't say weren't very good, but weren't heralded and stuck together long enough, which we probably will never see happen again.
No.
To have a culmination of all of their hard work pay off for one special season. And like, that's like I'm sure a lot of different college football fans around the country can talk about that one team. Oh, that team, they didn't have the crazy quarterback, but they had this guy who was just tough and resilient. And they had this, like local kid who was pushing the team forward. And then all of a sudden, like they randomly had this great secondary. Like it was just a really special thing of like, the guys had a lot of pride in the University of Colorado. They stuck around, they fought through some bad times, and they got rewarded for all of their perseverance. And it all culminated, I think, in that game with them clinching the Pac-12 South.
Yeah, I put that first among games that I've attended personally. It was a real toss-up whether I was going to put that game or the Washington State game higher, but because that did seal it, and actually they achieved what they set out to achieve, because the Washington State game was a better football game. It was a more iconic performance by that team. The Utah game I rewatched it, and it was a rough watch. Like, just so many mistakes, and the team was so tight because they had all that expectation really for the first time, where everybody was expecting them to win. Utah had blown it the week before, so it wasn't a winner take all for the conference for the division title. Utah was just playing spoiler. Although I will say, rewatching that game and looking at that secondary, I'm like, NFL guy, NFL guy, NFL. So, I mean, there was a lot of talent on that team as it turned out. But yeah, you've got Jay McIntyre out there making enormously clutch catches in key moments. I mean, none of those receivers. Bobo was kind of big, but Fields and Ross were pretty undersized. And yeah, that team was punching way, way, way above its weight. And it was incredible to watch. And as a senior at that time and a student section leader, no season will ever be like that again for me. I'm so happy for the students now that are experiencing what this is like, because I've kind of felt sorry for a lot of CU students over the years because I got one good year, and that's more than a lot of people have gotten. And so it's great to see now, not only did they have the fun last year, but this year it's like, it's real again. Last time we were winning games in November, it was like COVID. So anyway, yeah, I went with Utah at 6 and I put Wazoo at 8. And the UCLA game and the Arizona State game were awesome, but they didn't crack the top 25 for me.
And one last thing I'll say on this, that team, just because I feel like somehow it's become lost a little bit, maybe because of the NFL legacies of some of the other guys, but like Sefo Lufau was, he probably goes down as like a top 5 favorite Buff of all time for me for his toughness. I truly don't know if I've ever seen a tougher football player.
It was insane to watch him.
Yes.
He would come out of every game in tremendous pain. Montez would hand the ball off a couple times, then he'd come back like a series or two later and finish it. I mean, it was unbelievable. You forget that, but you look, and Montez had to come in against Washington State and I think Utah. Yeah. It was just all year, ever since that Michigan game, Sefo was banged up, and he just fought through it. I mean, if he doesn't get banged up, they might go undefeated, but enough about that.
I mean, and they're running him like 19 times in big games. Like they're just running quarterback power after quarterback power after quarterback power. And he was always up for the task. And like, they must have converted 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 at a higher rate than anyone in the country that year because of the way that he was willing to just be a battering ram.
He ran for 3 touchdowns in that Washington State game and like 108 yards as a quarterback on designed runs.
And not a fast quarterback, by the way.
No. Yeah, I could get choked up talking about that guy for sure, to say nothing of Philip Lindsay.
Next one on the list is 2007 Oklahoma. This one, speaking of getting choked up, has, sentimental meaning with me because I watched it with a friend who ended up passing away. So like that sticks out in my mind. But it was, this was a common theme in the Big 12 era of that time. It was just like, there's big bad Texas or Oklahoma is coming to town, and they've got the future number 1 overall pick at quarterback, and they've got, a 5-star running back. And it was Sam Bradford and I believe DeMarco Murray.
Bradford, yeah, I think it might have been DeMarco Murray. I just watched this game too, so I should know, but I've been watching a lot of games again recently, so yeah.
And I mean, it was just like like most people believed we had no shot. And I remember being at the tailgate before the game back when Franklin Field wasn't corporatized and was just like a rowdy tailgate lot, which I miss deeply. But like, me being me, even all the way back then when I guess I was 15 years old at the time, was just like, I think we got a chance. I said that every game, and like everyone at the tailgate being like, bro, we don't have a chance. Like it's not happening today. And then they looked right for 3 quarters.
Yes, they did.
Because
that's my favorite thing about that game is not only is it a huge upset, but it's a 17-point deficit they came back from in that game.
Yeah, in the 4th quarter.
Yes.
And I'll just remember, well, I mean, it's, Cody Hawkins to Scotty McKnight, which unfortunately at the time was a very like frowned upon duo, I guess, because, a lot of these things and moments were on the heels of really high expectations for the program. And like, you look back at something like that, and if it were to happen now, I think it would be remembered a lot more fondly than those guys were remembered back then, because the Hawkins era was so maligned, and just Cody playing was a huge like polarizing topic always in Buff Nation. And so like back then I think it was a little bit discredited, or I don't know, but it was an unbelievable comeback by two guys who actually are great Buffs. And not to mention, all the work put in by the defense that day. And I think Ryan Walters made some big plays in that game, if I remember correctly. But just that one with a walk-off field goal, which, by the way, do you remember the distance on that?
45 yards.
So I turned to, it was actually my sister's boyfriend at the time, who ended up passing away. And I turned to him and I was like, let's go. Like we got to be ready to rush the field. And I just remember him being like, this is not an automatic field goal. Like this is a long field goal. Like chill out. And I was
Sounds
just
like me.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, no, we got to get down there. We got to get down there. And so it was like kind of like the push and pull type of tug of war. Like I'm trying to go, he's trying to stay.
Well, where were you sitting or standing at that
student
point?
section. So
yeah,
I was 15, but my sister and her boyfriend were in school, and actually he had a friend who played for Oklahoma. So but we were, we were right there in the student section. Probably one of my first games being in the student section, come to think of it, because I was like finally old enough that my sister would let me like tag along with them. Rush the field. And I think at that time I had like hair halfway down my back, and
oh my goodness, I can't even imagine that.
Yep. And on the front page of Daily Camera, like the next day, you could see just me running on there and probably looked like a chick.
Have pictures of you in that surfaced on any DNVR shows?
I don't hide them, so it probably popped up here and there. They're all over my Instagram.
The first time I ever went to the student section, I was 11. It was the Texas Tech game in 2006, where they won for their first victory of the season, and the student section rushed the field. So as a little 11-year-old, me and my 11-year-old friend ended up in the middle of a field rush, which we thought was the coolest thing ever. Our parents were like freaked out. But that game did not make the list. the first win of Dan Hawkins' tenure did not make the list. And I think the reason that that one only went to 11 on my list, and not because as a game, it's like a top 5 or 6 isolated game, like number 3 in the country, and you come back from 17 points down to walk it off. But just the way it all unraveled after that season for Dan Hawkins, the disappointment, I think, just kind of overshadows a lot of that, like you were talking about, which is too bad, because it did help them make a bowl game that year.
It did.
My other favorite thing is that was going on right when I was sure the Rockies were going to be eliminated from the playoffs. And then Tony Gwynn Jr. got the triple off of Hoffman for the Brewers to keep the Rockies season alive. And then, of course, they won that night. They won the Sunday and they won the Monday. So that was an exciting weekend.
It really was. Actually, you just unlocked a new memory for me, or an old memory for me. The next day I went to that Rockies game, the Sunday game.
Me too.
And it was me and my buddy who were, we took the bus down from Boulder, and we sat next to 2 CU students, and one of them was just puking the whole time because he was so hungover from the party the night before after the Oklahoma win.
It's rough. That is a rough way. That is a rough way to go. It was like warm. Were you sitting in the sun? I was in the sun that day. I was in the cheap King Supers tickets down the first baseline.
First baseline, upper deck is where I was.
Oh, okay. I was in the lower level, but yeah, that was a time. What's number 2? I think I know. I have a guess at what number 2 is.
Okay.
Let's see if I'm right.
Send the guess.
Kansas State?
No.
Okay. Then what's number 2?
Number 2 is CUCSU 2004.
Yeah.
The goal line stand. And it's funny that you bring up the Kansas State game, because that one actually really does stick out for me. I just didn't know. I didn't know which one to take off of this for that. It would have been on there if it weren't for
you with the last one out. Yeah,
exactly. But CUCSU 2004. A lot of people know about this one, of course, but you've probably heard legend if you didn't experience it. Another one that's just like, this is probably like a once in a football fan's dream. You get 4 downs on the goal line with the game on the line, and if it's not like one of those things where they're tying, it's if they score, they win. If you stop them, you win. And anyone thinking about that is going to say, okay, our chances are very low here. They need 1 yard. They have 4 chances. And for the Buffs defense to stop them time and time. And the coolest part about it, talking about crowd pops, is the crowd pop got gradually louder every single time, of course, because the first time you're like, okay, all right, like we got this, let's do it. The second time louder, third time louder, and then of course the game ends on the last one, and everyone just lost their mind. And I've told this story before, but I was standing, in my parents' seats, and that was on the aisle, and the person on the other side of the aisle was a CSU fan, and me being 12 at the time, I'm just like running my mouth, like jawing at this guy, and he goes like around like the third quarter, he's like, "You want to make a bet on the game?" I'm like, "Yeah, $100. Like, I'll bet you $100." And my stepdad was like, "Hey man, don't make that bet if you can't pay it. Like, you better pay it. If you lose the bet, you got to pay the man." And I was like, I got it. Like, I don't have it on me, but like, if you pay him, I'll pay you back, type of thing. And he's like, all right, like, I'm going to hold you to it. Mm-hmm. And so then we get the goal line stand to win. And in the celebration, we're going crazy. And then I stop and look across the aisle, and the guy's gone. And I just remember my dad saying, "That's why you never trust a Ram."
So you didn't go down on the field for that one?
I don't think so.
Okay. Do not go back and actually watch it. I love how in your memory, the legend of what the CU defense did has grown to those proportions. But the clock management by Sonny Lubick, in actual fact, there were not quite that many attempts at it from the 1 yard line. But really? In your memory, it's 4, and let's let it be 4.
Wait, I want to know what actually happened now.
They only ran 2 plays.
Really?
From the 1 yard line. The clock management was so bad they only ran 2 plays. Marcus Houston got stopped on first down. They didn't spike it or stop the clock or do anything. Because remember, they were only down by 3. A field goal sends you to overtime. And they wasted so much time that they didn't get the second play off until there were like 4 seconds left. And then they got stopped short again, and they didn't have time to like call timeout or do it over.
Wow.
Yeah.
I swear I even looked at the game logs recently to make sure that my memory was right on that.
It's on YouTube though. You can watch it. I mean,
it didn't go to 4th down ever. Well,
sorry, but that doesn't take away the moment for you.
Why did you tell me? No, just kidding.
I said I wasn't going to, but
all right.
It's funny, that game I thought would be an obvious inclusion in the top 25, and then I kind of watched it and I was just like, if I had been there, I think it would have been different. But I felt like the 2005 game was better. Like the 2005 game had crazier like lead changes and the walk-off Crosby field goal. I think I also have a clearer memory of watching the 2005 game, which probably influenced my decision. But they went scoreless for a really long time in that 04 game. I don't know. It's just like it's one of the greatest moments, I think, in Folsom Field history. But I didn't want to put them both on there just because it's like it's a pretty short list, and to have back-to-back years against CSU. They were both great, though.
I got to go back and watch it because I do remember the crowd just like getting gradually louder and louder and louder, but maybe that's just as the clock is like ticking down.
Probably, yeah, because a lot of time they were just
wasted.
If I was a CSU fan, I would have shot my television set after watching that, like Elvis when he saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan or whatever. But
honestly, it reminds me a lot of the 2023 game, just in the sense of like the anxiety of the whole game was brutal. Like, like you couldn't get a stop. You felt like you're going to lose. They drive down pretty easily on that last drive to get in that position. And it's just like, we're going to lose. And honestly, talking about managing the game by the head coach, Jay Norvell put on a
disaster,
cowardly performance in that 2023 game.
What, you mean punting?
Yes.
To give Shedeur the ball back with a minute left? Yeah.
I also would have gone for 2 when I scored in the first overtime.
Yeah, I was terrified that they were going to do that.
Me too.
Terrified that they were going to do that.
Yep.
Oh man, the CSU game, it crept into the list just because it was an iconic drive by Shedeur, the 2023 one. And also just the atmosphere around Boulder with both pregame shows. And like, it seemed like the whole country stayed up until 3 a.m. Eastern to watch that game. It was a great occasion, but it was a miserable football game for me for most of it. I was wearing this shirt. That was actually the last time I wore this shirt. I never wear this because it's too cool to wear unless it's a special occasion.
Yeah, that is an epic shirt. I've got my Cam Silman Craig.
Oh, nice.
Can't Drown a Shark shirt on. Yeah, that is beautiful. I love the true silver on there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And this is your single stitch 1989. Yep. I found this on eBay. And this is like, I love it. If we make, no, I'll wear it to whatever bowl game. I'll wear it to the bowl game. We don't need to make the playoff. I'll wear it to the bowl game.
Let's go.
We all know what number 1 is.
Yes.
And it's no surprise, but you were there, and for that I'll forever be envious. So I want to hear your tale.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to fully recount it, I actually have to go back to the night before, which is Thanksgiving.
Let's tell people what it is first, because maybe they don't know.
Yes, of course. It's 62-36.
Yes.
2001. And I actually don't want you to correct me on any details if I'm wrong about them this time.
9-year-old Ryan's memory is 100% infallible.
Yes. I have to go back to the night before, which is Thanksgiving. And we had my whole family there. It was like one of the bigger Thanksgivings I can remember us having. And I have a cousin who was, I'm sure everyone has someone like this in their family where they just always are against everyone. Like he was a Red Wings fan. He was a Raiders fan. And of course, in this instance, he was a Nebraska fan. And just like, but like my favorite part about this is that the entire Thanksgiving dinner was talking about this game. Like that is, what I dream of when it comes to Colorado football is just like everyone wants to talk about it. It's honestly how it is right now, where like any person I see, the first thing they want to talk about with me is Colorado football. And so the whole night was about the game. And I just remember, him talking all the trash and, how they're going to run all over us and crouch and this, that, and the other. And then the other cool thing was because my dad was like a longtime season ticket holder, he had got invited to watch the game from Gary Barnett's office. And
was that in Dal Ward?
Yes, in Dal Ward with a balcony that looks out to the stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And so originally, I don't know exactly what happened, but originally it was supposed to be him and my mom that went in there, and then I was going to be in the stands with someone else in my family, but my mom was kind of just like, no, you go. Like, I can tell you really want to go. So my mom let me go. And we watched what I would guess to amount to the first quarter in there. And it was really cool. Like there was like, great food and all this like, ritzy stuff going on. But me and my dad looked at each other at one point and we're just like looking out at the stands, which were just absolutely losing their mind. And I don't even think we probably made it to the end of the first quarter. And of course we're losing our mind too, but like, it just looks like a madhouse out there. And he's like, we have to go. We have to go. Like we're going to the seats right now. So we leave, this like incredible opportunity. And we're just like, we got to be in the seats. And so we ended up just piling 4 into our 2 seats and watching the rest of the game from there. And like this, like, honestly, of all memories of my childhood, I guess from less than 10 years old, like this one, I remember so vividly. I even remember the graphics that they were playing on the Jumbotron. And they kept doing this thing where they would do like Lincoln, Nebraska, and it would show like a cow like grazing on a field. And then it would go Boulder and it would go Colorado, and it would show like all these like extreme sports. And like everyone would like, they'd show Lincoln, Nebraska, everyone would boo, and it'd be like a corn like waving in the wind. And then it would go back to Colorado, Ralphie running, and everyone would go crazy. And so like watching that and then just watching CU decimate them over and over again. And my favorite CU football player probably of all time is Chris Brown. So, watching him score touchdown after touchdown after touchdown after touchdown and was pretty epic. And then I think that was my first ever field rush. And my mom okayed it on the grounds that I was on my dad's shoulders. So that was pretty epic.
Well, they hadn't had a field rush in a long time. I mean, CU was, for a while, they were too good to be rushing the field against people, and then they could never quite beat Nebraska. I think something for people a little older than you and I is just the cathartic nature of that particular win when you look at how the last 5 games in that series had ended and how close the Buffs had gotten and the various heartbreaking ways in which they lost. Add in the fact Nebraska was, number 1 in the BCS, and all that. It's a perfect storm.
It was, and it's funny you bring that up because I also have vivid memories of watching the other CU Nebraska games in the years past with my grandpa, who basically taught me everything about sports when I was a kid, because my biological dad wasn't a big sports guy, and I'll never forget. I forget the guy's name who missed the extra point or chip shot field goal.
Chip shot field goal.
Yeah, chip shot field goal the year before or 2 years before.
Yep.
And I've never seen my grandpa, because he's a very calm. I don't think I ever heard him curse in my life. Never saw him drink. I'll never forget how mad he was. He was just ranting and ranting. This kid can't come back to campus, all this stuff. And so that memory also sticks out very, very strong.
It still hurts me to watch that, and I don't even remember it. I was living in California. I didn't become a Buffs fan until 2001 when I was living in Colorado. That 99 game would be a top 5 game on this list. They came back from 27-3 down and had a chip shot field goal to win it in a regulation. So that all factors into it. And I realized if I had put anything else number 1, I would have been kidding myself and trying to be too indie. But the 1989 game is, number 2 versus number 3, and the whole everything that led up to that game. It's a very deserving number 2. I couldn't imagine a different top 2. For some people, the 1986 Nebraska game, because it ended 19 years of losing to Nebraska, but there weren't the national implications that there were in the other 2 games. The Buffs were. It's the great irony that they didn't actually knock Nebraska out of the national championship game because the BCS was a scam.
Yep.
But Nebraska were dead men walking in that Miami game. They were, the emperor had no clothes, and they got completely embarrassed by that Miami team.
They did. And I've always felt that we might have put up a better fight. We obviously didn't do ourselves any favor, but I always felt like we were so, depressed by the fact that we did that to Nebraska, went and won the Big 12 championship, and somehow a team that didn't even play for the conference championship got to play for the national title.
Yeah, I think for sure that they would have been more fired up, although ironically they did score first in that Oregon Fiesta Bowl. But I still would like to agree with you there. I feel the same way about the 2016 team a little bit, that they didn't get to go to the Rose Bowl, and they just kind of. I also think that sometimes the magic just kind of wears off. I think if that 1989 CU team plays Notre Dame a week later, they kill them.
Yeah.
But it was 6 weeks between their last regular season game on November 18th and the Orange Bowl, and the magic wore off. And they made all these mistakes inside the 5-yard line and just shot themselves in the foot. And that happens in bowl games sometimes when you have that really long layoff and the team is not playing a game every week. It's so different than the NFL. It's almost like, imagine if you had to take a month off before the Super Bowl.
Yeah, well, and I honestly think that's going to be a feature of the 12-team playoff. Is you're going to get some team that gets to continue the magic, and we're going to get a Cinderella football team, which is going to be nice. Really, really cool.
Imagine the 2016 Buffs in round 1 of that, because they would have made it.
Yep. Well, and maybe we, I don't know, finish on this note or soon, but You mentioned in 2001 that they hadn't had a lot of field storms, and you said they had been too good to storm the field.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find it at all notable or interesting that the fans did not storm the field against Cincinnati despite clinching bowl eligibility? I felt like going into that, like, these fans might storm the field for this, and I won't blame them if they did, but I almost, during that game, felt that air of expectation that we talked about for that Utah game, which did have a field rush, but is like, I kind of feel like there's been like a little bit of a shift in the fan base where it's like, oh no, we belong here.
Well, not only that, but people are kind of looking past it. It's not the end goal anymore.
But that's a beautiful thing.
It is no, it's great, but also I also think they did kind of, even though it was technically a one possession game in the fourth, they controlled most of that game. It was also really late. That was the first time I've seen people going home early, actually, from a CU game. I was a little disappointed by that, but I mean, it was like 11:30 at night, and the Buffs had the game pretty much in control. But I think if it was a walk-off touchdown, people would have rushed the field. But I agree that it does feel like things are different. To quote the scoreboard after that Nebraska game in 1989, things have changed.
Things have changed.
And I'm so here for it. I am very excited to see, for the first time since 2016, very excited to see what a team that feels like it's peaking going into November instead of a team that's completely falling apart heading into November is going to look like. And who knows? Maybe they can add one more to this list they've already added a game to this season.
I know. I was just thinking about that. I mean, there's not a lot of like high caliber matchups.
No.
But you never know. Home playoff game. It could happen.
Let's end on that. Let's end on that. I like that. That would be, I don't even know how to imagine what Folsom would be like for that. But I'd like to. I'd like to see it, Ryan. I'd like to see it.
I would like to see it too. I can guarantee I would have tears streaming down my face during the national anthem.
Like No Sean Moreno in that one clip from 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yes. DNVR colleague No Sean Moreno, who now hosts our post-game show for the Broncos, or co-hosts.
Wow. What a nice plug I did there.
Yes, exactly. We will end there. I hope people enjoyed this. I had no idea how long this was going to be. I got to admit, I was not expecting an hour, but this was awesome. Like, this is what I love to do. I know it's what you love to do. Just talk Buffs, throwback, and reference.
We can talk about. We could keep going all night, you and me. But I gotta finish. I gotta finish these articles, man. They are not done.
And they have your best work has to come at the end, so there's a lot of pressure.
I know. I'm feeling the pressure, but this is good. I'm in the mood now. I was feeling baseball and watching the World Series, and now I'm like, let's do this.
All right, I love it. Well, I hope people enjoyed this. It's kind of perfect for the bye week. Some bonus content. I know everyone's dying for Buff stuff right now, so we'll end it here. Ted, appreciate you. Thank you so much for all of your hard work on this series. It's been an absolute joy to read, and one of my favorite things about it is it's going to exist forever. And maybe you'll be the in charge of determining when a new game comes in. What needs to be added?
That would be a great one down the line. Like, does it make the list? Yeah,
exactly.
All right, thanks, man.
Appreciate you. Go Buffs.
Go Buffs.